Welcome everybody to our first webinar. I'm just so excited and thrilled to have you here. We're going to be sometimes having our microphones unmuted with the opportunity to talk with each other. And also there is the chat box, which I'll keep an eye on if for some reason your microphone isn't working and you want to participate that way. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to. We're going to start with some check-ins. So as you can see, that's your name. And I think because we haven't formally met before, maybe also just say the organization that you work for, and then a short word or sentence naming something you're optimistic about regarding this program. And also, this would be a great time to let us know if there's anything that's likely to cause a distraction or inattention today. So I will start. My name's Beth Holtzman. I work for UVM Extension. And I am just so excited to have this group of people here. You bring really diverse backgrounds and perspectives and talents, and I'm just really excited about the group. The one thing that could cause a distraction is that I'm working at home and my dog sometimes needs to be let out, so I apologize if there's dog whining in the background.
Do you want to do the protocol where you pick the next person and then they pick the next person?
Sure. So I'm going to pick Alyssa to go next.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So my name is Alyssa White. I'm a graduate student at UVM. I work for the Agroecology and Livelihoods Collaborative there. And I'm looking forward to getting to know some new folks through this network, and also really understanding how to use logic models in our work. I'm working from home today because of the impending snowstorm, and I have one somewhat sick child at home who is very occupied. So I don't think she'll distract us, but she might pop in for a minute at some point.
I'm sorry she's sick.
It's okay. It could be worse. And I'm going to pick Emily Irwin to go next. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Alyssa. Awesome to see you here. Can everyone hear me?
You can't hear so well. Don't know if you can get a little closer.
Well, the mic and the computer has been causing us problems all morning.
I think, Emily, you might need to introduce yourself via the chat. The mic isn't working well.
Emily, maybe a headset. Do you have a headset there?
It was weird because I heard you before easily, Sarah.
The case of the missing mic.
I know. This morning when you were on the one side of it, it was working. It might be on the side. Yeah.
Oh, right here.
Hey.
There you are.
You just have to look at my really long face. I'm Emily, and I'm really excited to just have the space to think about this nutrient management planning updating program in a more theoretical rather than.
It's still hard to hear you, Emily. I'm sorry to say.
So type
Go
away.
ahead and introduce yourself via chat and I'll read it for you. And maybe in the meantime, I'm just going to point to Susie Walsh-Delos.
Okay. So can you hear me okay? How's my microphone?
You're fine.
Okay, so I'm Susie Hodgson at UVM Extension in the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and I'm excited about this program, this session Evaluation Works, because like all of us, we work in nonprofit educational world, and I think we all work in this area because we want to contribute something and we want to see where the value is and how that value reaches people, and figuring out at what point throughout our work, whether it's a project or program, we can evaluate better, beginning, middle, end, and keep that going is so important to make sure everything counts and that we're contributing what we expect to, or we wouldn't be working in this area.
And Susie, can you choose the next person?
Oh, yes. Wait, so Emily, are you going back to Emily? Because she was going to do her chat.
Sure, I'll read Emily's. So Emily says, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to think about nutrient management planning in a theoretical sense rather than just the intricacies of Go Crop. And on Emily's behalf, I'm going to point at Jeff Carter to introduce himself.
Hi there. So I'm short. Sorry, I got a tall computer.
Can you talk a little louder?
Hey, listen, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, UVM Extension. I'm in Middlebury, Vermont. I have a crew here, and we just like to do evaluation better on our programs.
Thank you. Can you pick the next person?
Kate.
Hello, so I'm Kate, and I'm with Center for New Leadership, and I'm helping with the design of this program and the launch. And I'm just excited to finally launch because we've been working hard at this, and it's fun to see you all in one space. And let's get going. And with that, I will pick about Jamie.
Hi, everyone. I'm with NOFA Vermont. I'm the Farm Business Advisor, and I'm pretty new to NOFA. I started in October, and I'm also somewhat new to nonprofit work. So I'm just excited more in general to learn about evaluation in a more like specific and sort of like concrete way, as opposed to sort of just learning about it through experience.
Thanks, Jamie.
And I will pick Nina.
Hi, my name is Nina Gage. I work for the Vermont Agency of Agriculture.
Can you make it a little louder? Can you talk a little louder?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
My name is Nina Gage. I work for the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and I am very excited about this program. I think a lot of times we get a little caught up in the day-to-day running of programs, so learning some of the methodology and tools that we can use to better evaluate the programs we have and improve what we have going, I think is what I'm really excited about. And I will choose Juan.
Hi, my name is Juan, UVM Extension Pastor Program. I'd like to take advantage of this course to be able to use evaluation as a way to evaluate the impact of what I do and what our program does.
You're in the right place.
Right.
And Juan, you want to pick someone who hasn't spoken, which I think we have Lindsay and Susie Walsh-Delos.
I'll pick Lindsay.
Hi, all. I'm Lindsay. I am an agronomy outreach professional up in St. Albans, and I'm excited about this to learn a little bit more about how we can quantify the impact that we're having, and in doing so, figure out how we can have an even bigger impact, what works and what doesn't work.
Great.
We just have
to call on either Susie or, and maybe in the meantime, Sarah, you could type in if your mic isn't working there.
Okay, I'm the last one. I'll just take that as a baton pass. I'm Susie. I work for the Conservation Districts. I'm optimistic that this group is comprised of a lot of our partners that we work with. So I'm excited that we'll be thinking about together and the way in which we evaluate our programs and projects that overlap or intersect.
Do you want me to read the other Sarah? There's two Sarahs? No, Sarah's only one Sarah. Sarah's excited to take our water sampling program to a deeper level by learning more about the farmer's experience with the making decisions based on data and making farm changes. So thank you for writing that in and accommodating the technical glitches. All right, off to the agenda. Welcome everybody. think there's a switch in the pages. We're learning new technologies too here. There we go. You want to review the agenda or you want me to do it?
Why don't you go ahead?
All right, so today we're going to try to pack a lot in our hour and 15 minutes or so. We've already done the welcome and the check-in, and we're almost done with the agenda. So we can give it up for us. We're going to do a little bit of housekeeping and catching, and in the future there'll be a catching up from last time. This time it's really about sharing a little bit about what we learned on your self-assessment, so you get a sense of your group. We're going to have 2 topics today. The first one's about how to become, or are you already, or how do you get better at being a learning organization? What are the qualities of that? And this will be a little bit of presentation, and then we'll break you into small groups so you can have a conversation about that. Then we're going to jump into theory of change, which is the root of all evaluation. So we'll do a couple slides and then again break you into smaller groups so you can start working on articulating your theory of change and some assumptions. We'll have a little bit of time for any questions that you have, and then we'll close with announcements, your homework. Yes, there's homework, and a reminder of what's coming up next. All right, so we're going to pack a bunch in, but we're going to try to make it as interactive as possible, because it's just important to try to do that here. And that next slide, going into housekeeping. So there's a couple things about online. How many of you have done online peer groups or learning sessions before? Anybody? All right, so you're probably familiar with some of the pluses and minuses. One of the goals of this program is to really build your community as a learning community and a networked community. And sometimes that's hard to do online, but we're gonna do our darndest to make that happen. So that's part of the design of breaking you into small groups. The first 2 webinars, it'll be largely random. As we start to form you into the learning circles, it may be less random, but for the next few times, you just get to know each other and work in smaller settings and then come back to the bigger group. There's also the reality of it's hard to read a room. And so as adult learners and folks who, you're the driver of your own course, speak up. Like wave your hands or use the chat box or tell us if we've not read the room well enough to know that you have a question or that you'd like to change the subject or this isn't working for you. So you get to own that part. And that's part of also developing the trust around this. The other piece of online giving, although we can see most of your beautiful faces, the reality is we're at home, we're at work, and there's distractions. So, and there's also Vermont technology glitches. So we'd recommend that you turn off anything else that's on your computer and really just leave the bandwidth for here. And I was in a learning session yesterday where I said, I'm gonna recommend that you put down the novel you're reading or writing and put down your cell phone and your email so that you really give yourself the gift of undivided attention, because it's such a rare thing to be able to do. So if you can just take an hour every couple of sessions and just dedicate yourself to this group and this learning, that would be awesome. We are recording the session. And so what happens with recordings is the small group conversations don't get recorded. We are missing a few people and I want to bring them in the room. We knew we were going to be missing Liz, Megan, Jen, and Lynn Allen. Is anyone else missing today, Beth?
I don't think so.
So we just want to welcome in this space because they'll be watching this later. So hey there, can't wait to see you in live next time. You'll have access to the recordings as well. So if we go too quickly, you can check it out. But if there's stuff that you feel like maybe it shouldn't be out there aired, try not to say it. And if it does get said, if things go on here, let's maintain some level of confidentiality. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about, the resource library. We're going to be building a resource library that you'll have access to. It'll be in a Google Drive. Beth's going to share where you can find the recordings. And as we start to find resources, or if you have resources to dump in there, that would be great because we know that you're all professionals. And so you probably have a lot of access to materials. And so we can start sharing those resources. And now Beth is going to talk a little bit about what we learned from your self-assessments. And thank you for taking the time to do them.
Thanks. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Thank you so much for sharing so much information about yourselves and working your way through that self-assessment. I know parts of it might have seemed kind of long, but it's really helpful to Kate and I to understand or to start to understand where you're coming from and what your priorities are. So in general, what we know about us is that we represent a variety of organizations. We're just under half of us are from Extension, but from multiple Extension programs. And then we have NGOs, state and local government, and land-grant university. In terms of how we interact in groups and working situations, we're kind of in the middle of the introvert to extrovert scale. That's just a reminder that when we're together, there may be people who are more apt to jump in and talk, and others we may need to give a little bit of space to let them share what they want to share. In terms of our teams that we're working with, there's also diversity there. Most of us are working with small teams, smallish teams, but some of us are in bigger teams. And our team's attitudes towards evaluation vary from, some teams are in the really do we have to perspective, and others are in the bring it on. And I can share any of these graphs if you want. In terms of your priorities, there were a bunch of multiple choice questions on the self-assessment where you could choose high, medium, or low in terms of your interest. And on the left, you'll see the top 10 topics based on, I assigned a numeric score, 5 to high, 3 to medium, and 1 to low. And these are the top 10. And just for perspective, these 10 all rated between 4.25 and 4.5. They were really clustered in the same basic area. And then I gave you a forced choice. We gave you a forced choice of the ones that you rated high. Which did you really want to focus on in 2019? So the darker yellow ones were the ones that more people selected as priorities, and the lighter yellow ones are ones that also came up. And I just want to point out that the best practices in survey design and other data collection methods actually wasn't in the top 10 in the numerical scoring, but it was something that was a higher priority when you were in the forced choice. And the identifying realistic outcomes and meaningful measures for your short and long-term impacts. Most of you identified that as something that you really wanted to work with your peers and colleagues, that was a topic that you wanted to be working on in learning circles and group conversation. And I think that reflects your instinct, your correct instinct, that that's something that takes conversation and feedback and iteration. So I think that's a great start for the project. And with that, there was one more thing I did want to just talk about, the things that we're going to focus on today are really about establishing a good solid foundation for exploring the highlighted topics on the right side of this slide. It's kind of a situation where I think we're gonna go slow at first so that we can go fast and be efficient and productive later.
All right.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Kate.
A little time on what is a learning organization. And Peter Senge from the Fifth Discipline, he writes lots of pages on what it takes to be a learning organization. But ultimately, it boils down to a group of people within an organization, a program, or a coalition who really want to work together and learn together and get the results that they aspire to together. And he would argue that to do that, you have to be willing to be a learning organization. And there's some core qualities of a learning organization that are important. And if they don't exist, it may be harder to implement some of the changes that evaluation are going to want to inspire. So one of the core components of being an evaluative organization is the capacity to be a learning organization. So let's flip the slide. talk about these qualities. So the key of it, like the key of being a learning organization, is that you are actively acquiring and transferring knowledge. And this means that with great intention, you're incorporating new ideas, which means you have to find new ideas in order to incorporate them, that you're then transferring the knowledge throughout the organization. So that requires tearing down some silos and getting rid of the information hoarders. I'm sure none of you are doing that. You've probably worked in places that happened before. So you can nod your head, yeah, I've seen that before. And then it's not enough just to have the information or to share the information. You actually have to do something with it. And so taking that information and saying, how do we apply it? What do we have to change? And that's usually the hardest part, is to actually change behaviors and not say, well, we've always done it this way. It doesn't really matter what this new information brings us, but use it to improve results and experiment a little bit. So there's lots of components about that can be involved in this, but really it comes down to, are you actively seeking information? Do you go out in the community? Do you have a budget for continuous learning? Are you empowering your team to learn? Are you tearing down the silos, sharing information, making other people share that information? And then in what ways do you funnel that information and experiment and try it and test it and learn from it? So any questions on those characteristics? The next slide. We're going to do a little poll, and then we're going to break up into small groups to talk about it. So in my experience, organizations, we might be a willing learner, but sometimes our organizations are a little chunky and maybe aren't quite there yet. So we're going to put up a poll that says, where is your organization now? It's going to be anonymous, so you can be honest. But essentially, we're going to ask you, if you were to liken being on a learning journey to mountain climbing, are you, as an organization, at home sleeping in your comfy bed? Are you shopping for guides on Amazon? Are you in the car on the way to the trailhead? Are you at the trailhead with your backpack and your water bottle filled? Are you halfway up the mountain appreciating your sandwich and your orange? Or are you at the top of the mountain setting up camp and looking for a super nice, really nice supper and a good night's sleep? Where is your organization on the learning journey? Everybody in?
I think we're pretty much there.
Excellent. So that we got people well on the path. So bravo to you. In the car, some of you are halfway, and some of you are at the trailhead getting started. So that's a beautiful combination of spaces. And what we're going to do now is Beth is going to break you up into small groups of 3 or 2. When you go into small groups, Beth's going to randomly assign you. You'll have groups of 3. You should turn off your mic so you can talk to each other. There is an opportunity if you have a technical glitch. Well, you're going to get a little message that says, yes, I accept this invitation to this breakout group. Spin through cyberspace into the, if you're a Harry Potter fan, it's the Flu Network, and you'll land. You can have a couple minutes, maybe about, what time are we at? I think you get about a little less than 10 minutes to talk about, why did you place yourself where you did on the mountain? What are the qualities that contribute or limit your organization's learning capacity? All right. So those are the 2 things that you're going to talk about. We'd like you to pick someone to share out to the whole group when you come back to say, these are the themes we heard. Don't have to get into the details, because again, that can be complicated. But what are some of the themes about what's working and what's getting in the way? All right. You can also, when you get in your small group, if you forget the questions or you get confused or you're having technical issues, there is a button at the bottom, if you hover at the bottom of your screen, that says, please ask the host for help. And that will let us know that we should come join you and do so. About a minute before we're going to break you up, there's going to be a message that comes on your screen that says, you got about a minute, and then we're going to close the groups out. So you should wrap it up and decide what your themes are. All right? Any questions before we send you down the Flu Network? Welcome back.
Hi, everyone. So I'm hoping that we can have one person from each breakout room give us one takeaway that you had from your conversation. And I'll start with the group that was, I think it was Jeff, Juan, and Nina.
Yeah.
We forgot to put a person to speak. Jeff, do you want to summarize some of our talk?
No, I was going to let you do that. You're so good at it.
Okay. So some of the things that we talked about were, you know, the roadblocks in our organizations, whether it's people or processes. We talked a lot about just like how increase in workload and time capacity can be a roadblock. The idea that, you know, a lot of people have many projects going on, and sometimes you're being asked to do things in so many different ways. You can't, you know, it's hard to understand really what's the point of doing it if you're not able to compare. And then the one thing that Jeff just brought up at the end that was really interesting point was, you know, the joy of doing it, the interest, and like the idea that, you know, if you want to do something well and have good quality and stuff, you have to like be kind of excited about it. So how can we bring joy and enthusiasm back to, you know, us and our staff and everyone that we work with in this process?
Thank you. Great takeaways. So the next room is Lindsay and Susie Delos.
So for us, one sort of consistent or common challenge that we face in our organizations that we realized as we talked is that both of our organizations work across the state and then have sort of subsets of the organization responsive locally and working locally. So the idea of trying to build a workplace culture that spreads across all of those entities and sort of is shared is challenging, especially because there's different dynamics and cultures at each one of those locations. So that was interesting to think about. Though we're different organizations in a lot of ways, that is a similar challenge for us as we think about how we build a culture. And like Nina was saying, sort of the buy-in for that. How do you make it worthwhile to everybody, especially when you're spread out all over the state?
Thank you. Great observations. And the third breakout room was Alyssa, Jamie, and Susie Hodgson.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to report back. Our conversation started off with the way that our answers to that question about where we'd be on the mountain would be different if we were assessing our larger organization versus maybe the smaller projects or smaller teams that we work on, and how we felt there's in general, for all three of us, that the larger organization has kind of a good learning culture and has built-in times and places to interact and talk about learning and assessment, whereas the smaller projects maybe would be assessed a little differently. And I think share kind of the same takeaway that it's hard sometimes to build in the time to do good assessment and rethink things when you're just caught into meeting deadlines and getting the on-the-ground work done.
Thank you. Great. And Emily and Sarah met with Kate and I as we continue to work with their technological challenges. And we could see them talking. We could see a lot of gesturing. It was great. They were having a good animated conversation. So Kate, I'll advance the slide. You ready to move on?
Yes, I think we are. So moving on to theory of change. Beth, do you want to do all of these slides or did you want me to do some of them?
I thought you were going to do the first couple.
Thanks, and I will. All right, so theory of change, and I think that's a term that most of you have heard, or at least in concept, and it really is how we talk about how a particular intervention leads to the results we're aiming for. And the key to a theory of change, and where sometimes it gets bogged down, is where we're not transparent with others or even ourselves about our assumptions about that theory of change. So when you're articulating it, it's really important to understand what are your baseline assumptions about your work and your clients or users of that work. Go ahead and change that. And I come mostly, my background's largely in the health and human service world. So Annie Casey, who does a lot of work in that realm, also talks about theory of change at a community level. So they talk about it being that roadmap that helps a community understand, again, its assumptions, and it connects the outcomes, the assumptions, strategies, and results all together. So it's really, it's almost like it's an equation. But I think the important part about their theory of change is that it does include the community, not just our own personal views on that. And I think that goes back to some of the assumptions about people and the communities that we work in. Okay, change it. think I might be done now. I don't know. Pass the baton to that.
Just to quickly, so the idea is that you're backward mapping from the goals that you have and within that framework, you're looking at the preconditions that need to exist for outcomes to be reached. You're really taking a look at your assumptions that underlie the work and your participants' beliefs, and you're clearly identifying what those interventions or program activities are. And the takeaway for me is that by looking at this stuff, you can help yourself identify the how and why of the change. And then, my little cartoon here, that without those steps kind of mapped out, you're kind of, it's just a black box. You don't really know where it's going wrong if you're not getting your results that you are looking for.
You just add something about the assumptions, Beth.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So part of there's also this idea about change theory, which is that you have to have a lot of preconditions that there are certain preconditions that are necessary for the change to happen. And the assumptions that you have about what those preconditions are relate to both your mental model, how you think it all works, as well as your clients or the participants in your program. And a couple of years ago, I was at an evaluation workshop in Washington, D.C. with literally the woman who wrote the book on evaluation. And she talked about this experience she had working with a group in an urban New Jersey community where there's very high levels of obesity-related disease, heart disease, diabetes. And so they were putting together a program, and their initial recruitment materials, what they talked about a lot was losing weight. And they had an assumption that everybody would want to be thinner, and that they would want to have free opportunities to have free programs to get thinner and look better, and that would help them feel better. And people didn't join, and they didn't, or those that did very quickly dropped out. And when they started to interview people to test their assumptions, what they found out was that in these communities, which were minority and immigrant communities, there wasn't an equivalent. Being big isn't bad. Being fat isn't bad. So a program that was focused on having you be smaller and take up less space in the world just wasn't resonating with those people's values and what was important to them. When they shifted and talked about things like preventing diabetes, preventing heart disease, heart attacks, the need for amputations, the need for dialysis, illness, living longer, being there for your children and grandchildren, then they started to have people participating more meaningfully. So if they were working from assumptions from their culture. So the takeaway for me are, what are the implications of thinking about that for our farmer audiences? How do our assumptions line up with theirs? How do our mental models line up with theirs? Where are they the same and where are they different in terms of thinking about your theory of change?
And so what I wanted to add about really being clear about assumptions versus the theory of change is that sometimes the theory of change is correct and you're not getting the results you want. And so if you're not getting when you're evaluating, if you're not getting the results, it's very easy to throw away the whole theory. And it might be a mistake. So because the root of the problem might be in some of your assumptions. So the key is understanding both parts, because if you can then do an analysis, say, oh, this assumption, this particular assumption is wrong. You don't have to throw away the whole body of work, the whole theory of change. You just have to adjust the work a little bit. And so that's why it's important to know both those parts. All right. Beth, is that our last slide on this one?
Well, now we're going to break out again.
We are going to break into doing the work, because a good facilitator actually doesn't do any work. They let the audience do all the work. So that's what we're doing with you today. But we're going to set you into to pairs, or I think trios again, if we can. And what we'd like you to do is divide the work. You're each going to take a chance at being the speaker, and you're going to state your theory of change in very simple terms. If we do this, then Y happens. We're mathematicians. So if we do this in our program, this is going to happen. And then why don't you take a stab at naming your primary assumptions about your work and your clients, right? So what is your, based on that, if we do this, then this happens, what are you assuming about your work? It might be as simple as we assume education works. And then you're assuming that your client is accepting of that education and going to apply it, right? So you might have some pretty straightforward assumptions. Then the listener or listeners is to provide some feedback. And that feedback is, yeah, your theory of change resonates with me, or not so much. And if they can identify any big gaps that you haven't thought about in the assumptions you've made, all right? This is going to tie to your homework, because again, there will be homework. But to demonstrate, we're going to demonstrate this exercise first, so you can hear it and then actually see it in action. So Beth's going to give us her theory of change about this particular program and some of her assumptions.
Okay, well, it's one piece of my theory of change. So you all are going to learn about best practices for assessing program performance at the input, output, and outcome levels. And as a result, you're going to use your data to assess how much you're doing, how well you're doing it, and the farmer benefits that result.
All right, and what are your assumptions, Beth?
My assumptions are that they have the capacity to make changes in their organization based on what they're learning, that they're going to be there to keep on doing it, that others in their organization are going to come along with them, that they have both the technological and overall capacity to do this assessment.
All right, so I'm going to tell you, Beth, that I love your theory of change. I do believe in education, and learning best practices can indeed help those outcomes. And your assumptions may be a little flawed. It sounds like you're describing a perfect learning organization and culture, and we may have to build in some time, space, and additional supports beyond just presenting best practices in order to help implement these changes in these organizations.
Those are great points, Kate. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right, everybody got it? You know what you're going to do? All right, for our happy pair without any audio, you're going to work together. I think we'll throw you in a room by yourselves. Again, sorry. And the rest of you are going to pair up. And again, you'll get a little warning that says, we're going to break up in a half an hour and a minute, and we're going to ask you to share out, but I won't tell you what we're going to share out. It won't be the specifics. See you on the other side.
We'd love it if each group could again report out on any, what insights you got about your assumptions. And we'll start with the group that was Alyssa, Jamie, and Susie.
I can report out. So I think we spoke a lot about, like, with the assumption of the end of a project and the implementation of it, and how like the circumstances that if throughout the project the needs change, how flexible can you be then to the end results, and does that get reflected? Or at the end of the project, do the stakeholders, if they're farmers, actually have time to implement the project, or like a greater enough understanding to do it by themselves? And then sort of that like follow up of what happens at the end.
Thanks.
So I'll just add a comment. So in that, so I think that's great, because hopefully evaluation's happening throughout the program, not just at the end of a program, so you can make the adjustments needed as you go along, right? And so that's a great thing to observe. And then I think the other piece is you're starting to touch on short-term, long-term, intermediate results, right? So again, learning something is a pretty quick short-term result. Implementing it takes a little bit time. And if you want to hang in there for the implementation, that has everything to do with your own program design and your use of resources. So you're touching on some pretty important questions about evaluation.
Great. So then the breakout room, that's Emily and Sarah. This is a big breakout room. Jeff, Juan, and Nina.
No volunteers?
No.
We didn't have Sarah and Emily with us. Or maybe
Okay.
they were there, but we couldn't hear them. Sorry, Sarah and Emily.
So what did your group, what's some things you learned about assumptions in general?
I mean, I can speak personally. I think it was really a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be initially to just like define, oh, what are the assumptions? But I think we were all kind of speaking in a zoomed out high level sense, which made it a little bit more difficult to talk a little bit more about the like discrete assumptions underlying a very general type of X equals Y situation. Juan or Jeff, do you have anything to add?
Nope, not for now.
It was a good exercise.
I couldn't really hear you, Jeff. Did you have something you wanted to add, or you're good?
No, I'm just saying it was a good exercise, and we got into detail about 3 of these concepts. So that was good to think about.
Good. I'm glad. But it is fun to think about putting the two things together and naming them. And it isn't easy, as you said, but it's well worth your time, and you'll find that this is going to be your assignment for homework, so you'll have a little more time to fine-tune it. For our good friends who have technical issues, we could try hearing from you, or you could type it into the chat if you have any observations.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
My assumption was that once farmers are presented with the water quality result data, that they would make a change.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty.
And did you get a hole poked in that assumption, or is it good to go?
Well, yeah, Emily did bring up like, well, are the data sampling methods always the same? Like, would the farmer question the results? Do they trust the results?
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, can you hear me?
Yep.
We also talked about, like, we're assuming that they have the capacity to make that change, and that, well, financial and I guess, yeah, mostly financial and time to make things that needed.
So that's great, because again, as you poke holes in the assumption, it starts to influence your program design, right? And also how you evaluate. So that may even frame up some questions that you want to put into the evaluation, so you can start testing the assumptions themselves. Right?
Mm.
All right.
And our last breakout room is Alyssa James. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's Lindsay and Susie.
Do you want me to take it this time?
Yeah, awesome.
All right. So I think that what we were kind of generally talking about, both of us, was that both of our programs do a lot of work to minimize the barriers to implementation of different projects. And so our assumptions were like, the more we throw out it, the more we minimize the barriers, the higher the likelihood of behavior change. And I think some of the flaws in that assumption is it's starting with the premise that people want to change, when in reality sometimes it's like the thing that they're doing is working just fine enough, or there's ultimate resistance because the benefit to change isn't shown to be worth it. In fact, could be more of a hassle. And just one other thing with that is that sometimes the larger goal and having the initial contact of implementing a project or whatever is really to engage in a relationship that can be long-standing, to act as a medium between those who have information and where the information could be most useful.
That's I think that as Beth had talked about earlier, the whole the whole arena of what inspires and incentivizes and navigates change and behavior. That's the juicy space, right? So when you look at results, that's often the hardest place to work, and it's the sometimes the longest in the making. And so I think you've touched on something about trust. So building relationships as a leading indicator of what's the likelihood of inspiring behavior change is probably spot on, I would say.
Great observations, everyone. So I think at this point we were just going to open it up generally to your questions. If there's any question you have about what the material we've covered today, something that came out of your conversations, or more generally. And we have about 9 minutes left. We will end on time. Everybody's quiet. We do have time for questions.
I think a overarching question, you probably have gotten at this before, but if you could just summarize again, like what is your overarching goal for us as participants at the end of this program? What do you want us to walk away with?
I would like each of you to be doing a better job evaluating your programs in ways that lead to stronger and more impactful programs. And I think for each of you, that could be a different set of actions. I think there's a lot of commonality, but some people have been running programs for a long time. Some people are very new to their organization. Organizations are changing. So it's going to look different for everybody, but I want you to have something that you feel will help you do a better job doing your job. And framework or a series of frameworks that you can use in your future work. I'm anticipating that each of you might apply this to a very specific program or project, but you might be able to use it as a model for something else down the road, or your team might. And finally, I'm hoping that we'll have a kind of a network of people who have all gone through similar training and are available to help and coach and support each other. Because in Vermont, we're pretty low on evaluation specialists and resources. So I'm hoping that we can be there to support each other and perhaps collectively bring in some more expertise up our overall level and and bring in some expertise to help us do a better job. I hope that answers your question.
And hopefully it aligns with what you're hoping to get out of this too. Anybody else, a question or comment?
And I'd just like to add also that I recognize also we're all really busy, and so people are going to be working, the point of this is to help you with your work you're already doing. I'm really trying to minimize extra work, just make work. So I'm trying hard and will appreciate your feedback to make sure that the assignments, that what we're asking you to do is actually adding value to your programs. And if it's not, then give me the feedback and help me adjust things so that it does add value for your work. Other questions?
All right. So you'll have access to this material, and we'll start populating a library of other resources, and you can add to that. And if questions come up, you can always reach out to us as well.
So does anybody have any announcements? Okay. I'm going to email you a worksheet to help you refine your theory of change, or a theory of change for some component of your work, and your assumptions. And we're hoping that you'll take a few minutes to where appropriate, share it with your colleagues and get feedback from them. And just to identify one thing that you would really like to know for sure about your assumptions. All of you got copies of your self-assessment and your application in which you already defined things that you wanted to learn and focus on. So this is an opportunity for you to check in on how this exercise compares with the things that you identified earlier, and to think that through to make sure that you're on the right track for where you need to be going. Next week will be, or next month, I'm sorry, we'll be going over our homework. We're also going to look a little bit at change management. And I don't know if Kate, you want to give a little bit of a preview on that?
Mm-hmm. So a little, just change management is one of the hardest things we can do as organizations or trainers or consultants, right? So there's a couple of layers here. One is within your own organization or program. So if this is something new or you're shaking it up a little bit, what are some tips for helping to implement that so that everybody's on board and you can anticipate, I think folks talked about roadblocks earlier, which can be people or systems. So looking at some tools that you can use to plan and execute change. And I think it has implications too for the changes you're trying to make with your program participants. So we'll just look into that a little bit.
So, and both of these webinars are going to serve as the foundation for our hands-on day in early April, where we imagine most of the day you'll actually be doing your own work, work on your own, work in small groups that will be moving your assessments, your surveys, moving that stuff along. So some people may be coming to evaluate data. Were to start to analyze data that they've brought with them from winter workshops. Some people might be planning ahead. Some exercises may be different for different groups. But we're planning a day of working on our own stuff.
So with that, with online community, we start with an opening and we greet each other and acknowledge the folks who can't be in the space with us and sort of ground ourselves in being in the space, and we also close. So today we're going to do this a close that just says, what's one thing you appreciate about our time together? And I can start, and we'll do the same model where we pick folks, I think, because that is easier than the popcorn. So I appreciate your attention, and I also have to say how much I appreciated watching Emily and Sarah laugh and giggle and talk so animatedly. And I will pick them so that we can sort of deal with their tech issues and get that out of the way right away.
Okay, I think it's working. Can people hear us?
Sort of.
Sort of. Okay. Yeah, I think I just appreciate having the time to think about these things on a little bit of a higher level. Sarah and I often get caught down rabbit holes talking about things that aren't sort of leading to our greater mission, I guess.
And
that works for me. I would say the same thing. I think also the learning organization is that you about.
I can't hear you, Sarah. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
All right. So I'll pick on your behalf. Let's go with one. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I really appreciate the fact that this group found, you gave us a formula to really evaluate the success of our programs or whatever project we are doing. The if then, it's really revealing to me in terms of how simple it is and what we can do with that. So I plan to use it, and thank you for that.
Excellent. And who would you like to pick to go next?
Alyssa.
You have to
unmute.
Sorry. Sorry about that. I was muted. Wow, I really enjoyed this time. I just appreciated everyone's willingness to share and the opportunities to connect in small groups on through technology, which I hadn't seen before, the breakout groups. I found that really, really helpful to get into a discussion with folks. So thanks, everyone.
I'm so glad that worked for you.
All right, you get to pick the next one.
Oh, Lindsay.
Sorry, I'm gonna unmute twice. I also like that there was a part of the breakout groups that was helped keep it engaging, and I appreciate your facilitation too. And I'll pass it on to Jeff.
Yeah, I like that small breakout session so you could talk better. Yep. Oh, I gotta pick somebody?
You.
Susie, how about you?
This Susie, I think there's two of us. I'll jump in. I appreciated learning a new Zoom trick on the breakouts. I'm with all of you. That's magic. I've never done it. Love it. And also the opportunity to chat with Lindsay. I usually just see her running webinars around GoCraft, and then I actually got to talk to her, which was really special. So thank you.
That's great.
Jump in as the other Susie, because I'm not sure which Susie Jeff was referring to. It's Susie Hodgson here. And the second, what the other Susie said, yeah, that's my first time experiencing Zoom with the large and the small breakout. So seeing how that dynamic works and screen, really great. And also in terms of sharing with colleagues back in our organization, I hadn't really clued into Juan being part of this evaluation process. So I'm kind of excited to see what I put on my original form, compare with him, and kind of test some of my assumptions with a colleague as well in the organizational setting. So I think that's exciting. It's various opportunities we have to make this work. And I need to, wait, no, I've changed my settings so I can't see everybody except for one.
I think Nina hasn't gone. Anybody? Nina and Beth. Is that true?
And Jamie, I think.
Oh, and Jamie. Yep.
Jamie, are you ready to go?
Sure. I appreciate getting to think about my organization in ways that I haven't, and the work that I do in ways that I haven't. So I'll pick Nina.
I really appreciated the time to just take time away dedicated specifically to this, and the space to receive feedback.
But not least, I think we got Beth.
And I'm just so happy that you all, I appreciate all of you coming and participating and engaging in being here. Thank you.
Everybody, see you next time. Do good work.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.